When I was just a little lad, my father said, "Son, you see that universe, it's gone into the red. You can make a world or two and create a human race and watch over them from your throne in outer space. And you know you won't be bored after you make day, because you can tap, tap, tap your hours away. Thou shalt not tap, 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 don't commit, tap, tap, tap. Have no other gods before me." That funny, slightly irreverent song was composed when I was 17 years old. My friend David Rappaport wrote the lyrics, and I wrote the music. There was more to it. It was the beginning of an entire musical we would write. Obviously, the music was about organized religion. And in this first scene, which is the musical's opening, people were milling around on stage, and they looked bored, confused, and bewildered. And after a while, the man says, "What should we do?" And a woman answers, "I know, we should pray." And the people get on the stage, get down on their knees, and suddenly a man appears in flowing robes on a trapeze. He sang the song I just sang, and the musical went on from there. In fact, the tap, tap, tap part was enthusiastically sung by the people on stage in response to Jesus on the trapeze through more irreverent lyrics. Yes, I was 17 and already seriously questioning my Catholic upbringing. By that time in my life, nothing about Christianity made sense to me. I was beginning to understand that it never would. And quite aside from the fact that I made fun of it, I was also going through a rather painful divorce from it. To be honest, my questions about Christianity started a long time before then, when I was in catechism as a child. Too many of the questions I raised in response to what I had been told were unsatisfactorily answered with, "Well, Clovice, that's just a mystery of faith." And the painful divorce resulted from the feeling that my entire moral and spiritual universe was being unraveled at the core of my being. Was I a terrible sinner? Was the devil causing me to fall away from my religion? What's wrong with me? How come I can't believe that seemed to be something so unbelievable? And why don't I have enough faith to overcome my doubts like other people seem to? And those questions were all serious to me at the time, and I was drifting away from anything I knew about religion. And that growing distance made me feel isolated from other people, and it made me feel wrong. I didn't have any guidance through those waters that I was trying to navigate. You see, at that time, I still believed in God, but I was slowly forming an opinion that whatever God existed had to be reasonable. Indeed, that God had to be much more reasonable than the one I was taught to fear. Fear of God was one of the first things to tumble away from me. It seemed that a rational God would not require me to be fearful of him. And why should the God that created all things in the universe need me to have any opinion of him or her, good or bad, afraid or praising? I thought, why would he care? So the concept of sin didn't seem reasonable to me, and it still doesn't. It's not the definition of sin, which is to be an error or to cause offense. I understand that part. The thing that seemed unreasonable to me was that God would punish me for something that Adam and Eve did. One of those uncomfortable questions I kept asking in catechism was, so if my father committed a crime, would I have to spend the rest of my life in jail because of what he did? And the answer was always no. So you can guess what my next question elicited the mystery of faith response, when I would just ask, well then, how come God condemns all of us for what they did? Of course, the whole condemnation issue was another thing I found baffling. Why would God create me just to condemn me for what I think or say or do? Why even create me in the first place? So the answer catechism offered was, we're created in the image of God. We are given free will, unlike angels, who were created to serve God and glorify him and who cannot sing. Okay. So what's the advantage of having free will? Free will sounds like a bad deal to me, doesn't it to you? I mean, if I did something to piss God off, like having premarital sex, I'm really screwed for life and eternity. So like most people, I remember what that was like. During my time in college, I became an atheist. I thought of creation as a process that is not the result of or in control of an omnipotent, omniscient being. The process of creation is neither reasonable nor unreasonable. Finally, a process-oriented universe made sense to me because it accommodates both creationism and evolution, in the sense that creation is simply a more spontaneous expression of whatever consciousness underpins reality. Now, I was coming to those conclusions before physics started telling us strange things like, consciousness is essential to creating matter and energy. The process-oriented universe view does not diminish or dismiss the importance of consciousness. It merely does not describe a personality or any particular intelligence to that consciousness. I was an atheist because I rejected the belief in the existence of deities. In a narrow sense, atheism is specifically the position that there are no deities. Most inclusively, atheism is the absence of a belief that any gods exist. In the process-oriented universe I just described, there's no supernatural being that's holier or more sacred or more divine than you or I. And over the years, as I gained more experience in life, I came to a scratching feeling that there must be some higher force or power, if you will, that is at work in the universe. More specifically, that force may tip the scales of chaos in our favor on occasion. Now, whether that force is an expression of some intelligent action or not, I can't say. Did you know there's a category of agnosticism called apathetic or pragmatic agnosticism? And that's the view that there's no proof of either the existence or non-existence of any deity. Still, since any deity that may exist appears unconcerned for the universe or the welfare of its inhabitants, the question is mainly academic, and therefore their existence is of little to no impact on personal human affairs and should be of little theological interest. Some people are confused about the difference between atheism and agnosticism. Many believe an agnostic outright rejects the existence of a deity and thinks an atheist needs proof of that existence. I'll explain. According to Richard Dawkins, a distinction between agnosticism and atheism is unwieldy. It depends on how close to zero a person is willing to rate the probability of the existence of any given godlike entity. About himself, Dawkins continues, I'm agnostic only to the extent that I am agnostic about fairies at the bottom of the garden. Dawkins also identifies two categories of agnostics: temporary agnostics in practice and permanent agnostics in principle. Dawkins considers temporary agnosticism an entirely reasonable position, and he views permanent agnosticism as fence-sitting intellectual cowardice, as he puts it. Some argue that faith is all that's needed to perceive the God that I couldn't find. The same faith informs us of many things we cannot see or measure. But you see, I still believed in that God, that personality or intelligence. It must be reasonable. Here's what I mean. It makes no sense to me that the God who many believe wants to make his presence, laws, and requirements known to us needs to rely on human beings to interpret, then write down what he wants us to know. Why bother with such a crude, inefficient means of communication? Why can't the God that spins galaxies in place, directs inscrutable quarks, and invented DNA provide us with more clear directions? Aside from being reasonable, it seems this God should also be immensely efficient, right? Why all the puzzles and secret handshakes, the mysteries of faith, and the word reserved only for those who can hear it? Some physicists now say that we are co-creators in our existence. And that can be backed up with some pretty esoteric mathematics and more scientific proof, along the lines of what I talked about when I first was talking today. So what can that mean? Well, if true, it means that everything we think about existence, about God and our place in the universe needs to change radically. It means we need to change our thinking about the universe and even consider the possibility of an infinite number of universes. The physics who make those claims about co-creation are not necessarily envisioning a collaboration between us or any particular deity. That partnership is instead between us and everything else in existence. If a godlike entity is also present, the more the merrier. As co-creators, we may need to be careful of what we create or manifest. And there's a realm where thought is apparently quite powerful. I'm going to skip ahead. There's time issues here. But here are some counterintuitive truths about what's called quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is so challenging to understand that everything about it goes against our everyday experiences and common sense. J.B.S. Halden marveled, quantum theory is not only queerer than we suppose, it is queerer than we can suppose. Niels Bohr said, anyone not shocked by quantum mechanics has not understood it. So here are some counterintuitive truths about quantum mechanics, or QM. Please bear with me. And bear in mind that everything that I tell you that has been experimentally verified. Quantum mechanics tells us that an observation of one object can instantaneously influence behavior of another immensely distant object, even if no physical force connects the two. QM tells us that observing an object to be someplace causes it to be there. It wasn't there before you observed it. If we observe an atom to be someplace, our looking at it caused it to be there. QM tells us that an object can be in many places and many states at once. QM denies the existence of a physically real world independent of someone's observation of it. If that's not mind-blowing, I don't know what is. And it totally throws this whole Newtonian view that we have, that we all grew up with, throws it out the window. So you can see common sense and the quantum realm are radically opposite things. If you're having trouble with all this quantum stuff, you're not alone. Einstein struggled with accepting quantum theory and its implications. And this is when he said, I cannot seriously believe in quantum theory because physics should represent a reality in time and space free from spooky actions at a distance. When Einstein spoke of spooky actions at a distance, he meant that two objects speeding away from each other at the speed of light are still instantaneously connected. Fiddled with one particle and the other is fiddled with in precisely the same way. The implications of the quantum realm scream for an encounter with human consciousness. As scientists, they tend to be a bit agnostic about the whole issue of consciousness. And furthermore, many physicists ignore the plausible implication that human consciousness can direct and influence objects in the physical world. So here's what I'm getting at in this whole discussion of how to navigate in the waters between faith and God, atheism and agnosticism. It should be abundantly clear that if people living in biblical times knew what we now know about the nature of the universe and our place in it, their ideas about religion, and more specifically God, would be different than what has been handed down to us. And yet people living in the modern world insist that the beliefs of our ancient ancestors, who never talked on a telephone or saw a reality show on TV or flew in an airplane or listened to a radio or had a fraction of the knowledge we now possess about what is actually up there in the night sky, that somehow they should be more accurate and relevant than modern beliefs. So if you're looking for something to believe in, I say start by reading a book that isn't 1,000 years old, that even the National Enquirer would have some trouble publishing. I'd rather live honestly, doubts and all, than live a life in fear of a God that apparently can't abide those doubts. What kind of God wants you to question, reason, and doubt everything except him? This God gave us a brain and free will, but doesn't communicate with us about some plan he has for us in any clear, unambiguous manner, and then condemns us to hell for what? Being human and exercising our free will? I'm sorry, but I genuinely believe that what motivates many religious people is ultimately a fear of death and punishment. I tell you this, I'd rather live in a world where people are much more afraid of harming each other than of insulting God. I believe in a God, she would be reasonable, just, fair. She won't come in 3 parts. She's dead sexy and delights in all of us just the way we are. And she marvels at the interactions between what we think of as good and evil, reinitializes and reinvents us when we wear out or are killed in the simulation, and has a wicked sense of humor. If that's not the God you believe in, then I invite you to make up one for yourself. But please don't fear the one that some ancient people made up. In the worst case scenario, everything I think I am will blink out of existence when I do. In the best case scenario, my God will meet me after I die and she will ask me to dance. And I will, of course, say, absolutely yes. But first, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Namaste.